And we're live. Jen, do you want to call Sam Ronan on my phone and see if he's around? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting our first live stream Google Hangouts broadcast of political, incisive commentary and analysis. I am being moderated by Jake Best here, acting as independent moderator on this occasion. So have at it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me and letting me participate in this discussion tonight. So I guess while we're waiting, if you just want to start out and tell us a little bit about yourself, what got you into politics, and what how you decided to run for the 3rd Congressional District in Florida next year.
Well, I got into politics since 1981 when Ronald Reagan started doing things which seemed to me to be trashing the Constitution, trashing traditional respect for labor, and many other things which seemed questionable to me. But I was invisible because all I was doing was talking to neighbors and friends, and it wasn't until 2015 that Bernie Sanders showed the way for people to be awoken, and he demonstrated that people were paying attention. And he introduced to the populist phrases like single-payer health care and the idea of tuition-free college, which had existed in California back in the 70s. And it became possible to talk to people, and it became a compulsion because the rapidity with which we are destroying our country, we, in the prestige of our representatives who are not representing us, but are representing corporations, that I thought there was a better way and that I could follow in the path that Bernie had cleared, and proven quite successful.
So you also ran for Congress last year. So take us through a little bit.
Democratic.
Well, yeah.
I'm right there with you, like that. That's he was.
This should probably work better if I unmute my microphone. Yeah. It says I can unmute, but it doesn't unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, well, Sam Ronan has joined our conversation, completing the 3-person panel.
All right, so it looks like we're waiting for him to get set up. So take us through your plans for the Democratic primary here in the 3rd Congressional District.
Well, the Democratic primary is only 9 weeks from the general election. And like Julius Caesar in Gaul once, he had to build a circle around his army in front and behind and fight a war on 2 fronts. So because we intend to win the general election, we are already campaigning for the general election by talking to all constituents of the 3rd district, because I think that's what you have to do as a moral candidate anyway. And you're not going to win in 9 weeks if you start talking to Republicans and independents at that point. So we're talking to everybody at the same time that we were running a traditional Democratic primary race. The distinction here in Florida right this year that's new is that you can do online registration. So up until 30 days before the primary, you can register people as Democrat when you knock on their door. So that's a tremendous potential difference from previous years. It makes it somewhat closer to being an open primary.
Right. So taking the viewers through the 3rd Congressional District, ever since the area was redrawn to make it more friendly to Republicans, I guess you could say, it's always been held by the Republican Party. So outside of the city of Gainesville and the Otro County area, which is reliably blue, what is your plan to reach out to outside counties to increase their vote share and have the chance to get some Republicans to vote for you to have a chance in the race?
Well, I practiced that. That was the advantage of my 2016 run. That I practiced talking to every Trump shirt that I saw, went to the Trump grand opening, Trump headquarters in Alachua County. And I found that Bernie had actually already done the proselytizing there, that by my small sampling, about a third of the people who were voting for Trump actually would have preferred to be voting for Bernie, but he didn't make it through the Democratic primary, which is a long discussion. But a comment upon the gerrymandering. The district was redrawn in 2010 to be bright red. In 2016, a new map went into effect, which made it slightly less red. Trump still won the 6 counties of this district by 60 to 40, but the Democratic candidate got almost 40% in the congressional race, but Ted Yoho's, the incumbent Republican candidate, his take was driven down from what Trump got by 3.4%, and that's about what I got. Fully, it appears 94% of what I got was taken off of the Trump voters given to the Bernie platform. And that was with only $1,000 of expenditure. So there was really no, if you hadn't met me, you probably had never heard of it.
Gotcha. So it looks like we have Sam on the line. Sam, can you hear us?
He's talking to a friend as of a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah, I'm back, and I apologize for that. There was some.
So I think we might as well continue.
He's on.
Yeah.
Great.
I'll take it around.
All right, so welcome, Sam. So Sam Ronan is running for the 1st Congressional District in Ohio next year. So if you would give the viewers just a brief introduction about yourself, why you decided to run for this race, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Samuel Ronan. I'm running for Congress in Ohio's 1st Congressional District. And quite frankly, the reason why I'm doing it is because leadership is sorely lacking in our government. It's the same reason why I ran for state representative. It's the same reason why I ran for the DNC chair. What we have right now is a political culture that is devoid of morality and understanding of what we regular people go through every single day. And that's my motivation. It's not that I think I have the best and brightest ideas. It's not that I think I'm the greatest thing since JFK. I think I adequately represent people, and that my motivations are to make everybody's lives better, not just donors and not just the few. To me, it's not about party affiliation. It's not about who can raise the most money. It's not about being an incumbent, a Republican, a Democrat, grassroots, Green Party, whatever. It's about, do you have the spine, the fortitude, and the character to represent your country and your constituency?
Right. Awesome. So can you take us through a little bit why you decided to run for the DNC chair last year and sort of what you got out of that experience?
Sure. So I ran for the DNC chair. I wouldn't say quite on a lark or on a whim. I actually went to the Columbus Forum expecting to support one of those candidates and putting all my efforts behind them. But unfortunately, throughout the forum, they were asking questions, what about this? How would you fix this in the party? So on and so forth, until the question was asked, what will you do to bring people back to the party? And mind you, they were on a dais. It wasn't like 20 feet away from people. It was like 6 inches off the ground. And it was a cordless microphone. And not a single one of them answered the question. Not a single one of them did what I would have expected a leader to do. All they had to do was get up off that chair, walk to somebody in the audience, and hand them that microphone and say, what do you want from me? What can I do to earn your trust and your respect to come back to the party? And it just simply didn't happen. So that's when I knew that the entire party, the entire system, the whole political process was corrupt, and it needed to change at the highest levels. I mean, if one half of the, I should say, if both halves of the duopoly are corrupt and don't care about people, then there's no choice. There's no chance for people like you and me to make it in this world. because our voices will continue to be crushed and pushed under heel. So that's why I ran. And of course, the process itself, that was a bit of an adventure on a very small budget and very time consuming. But, I got to meet a lot of people. I got to, see old friends that I hadn't seen for, I can say things like a decade. And, it was very enlightening how the political process works. But I got to say, I give myself a pat on the back every single day because I won all the national polls. I was able to push the narrative from state strategy to local strategy. And I was able to get the word out there that we aren't done fighting, that we, the people, are here to stay, and we're trying to make our voices heard, and we're succeeding.
Gotcha. So that's a perfect segue into my next question. So we'll start with Tom. So last week, obviously nationwide, Democrats won a lot of races, whether you're talking about governorship races all the way down to local county races and school board races. And it really brought a lot of morale to Democrats throughout the country. So what do you think you can attribute to that win last week for so many Democrats across the country? And do you take sort of pride in knowing that the Democrats did well? And do you think that will help next year nationwide?
Well, I believe that progressive Democrats have a real advantage at this time. I looked back a few months earlier and I saw immense investments by the Democratic National Party in losing races like John Ossoff in the Atlanta area in Georgia, and very minor investments in people like James Thompson in Kansas and the gentleman who was running in Montana. And they almost flipped 20, 25, 30-point districts. Now we see progressives flipping districts that were bright red. As I started to say earlier, Ted Yoho's advantage in the last election was only 13.2% over myself and the Democratic candidate. And I think we can easily collect the other votes that Bernie Sanders has actually done the groundwork. We have to simply convince people that we truly represent these values, that both parties have been corrupted by corporate money and have for a long time been working at odds with ourselves to the advantage of corporations. And it's not a question any longer of which party did worse, which is a lesser evil. We have to do the right thing, or our grandchildren will suffer. They are potentially already at risk by global warming. They are earlier at risk by an atrocious healthcare system. And that will be my first agenda item, to do single-payer healthcare. And there are a couple of caveats. You have to do it immediately so that you reveal the depth and breadth of corruption, and you win political capital by that. Donald Trump is working hard to make this plan inevitable, because in the last week of October, he passed the budget resolution, presented, and it passed the House and the Senate, the budget resolution that cuts Medicare and Medicaid by $1.5 trillion. These are the functional parts of our healthcare system. And 100 million people, 120 million people across the country depend upon those two things. But they also let CHIPS funding expire, aid to hospitals that serve low-income people. They're required to serve low-income people by law, but now we do not longer reimburse them. So we're trying to actually bankrupt the hospitals that help the poor people. People notice this. They are waking up. People wish to keep their head buried in the sand, particularly Trump voters that I've talked to. But if you get them to speak to you, which begins with respecting the fact that they did not have a very attractive choice. Everybody, I think, wanted a non-conformist, non-status quo candidate. And the only one that took it was Trump. Now, he has violated every positive thing he said in the campaign. All we have to do is, with respect, speak to that fact to his adherents. Let them know there is a better path.
Got it. And Sam.
Oh. Microphone. I didn't hear you, sorry. I tried to unmute my microphone.
Now, does that work?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So what do you take away from the Democratic victories last week across the country from the top of the ticket down?
You know what's funny about the Democratic victories? Largely, they were progressives. And fine, some of the ones that were establishment, they got the party support and all the money and this, that, and the other. But unfortunately, I don't think it's enough of a victory across the country to show that there's a real shift in ideology. People are still disgusted. People are still turning out in record lows. And fine, we have a Democratic governor now in places where we haven't had one in a while, and that's great. That is fantastic. We're keeping the Constitutional Convention at bay, but this could be more political theater. And it's certainly not due to the leadership of the Democratic Party that these victories occurred. It's due to the tenacity of the campaigns. It's due to the ideology and the platform of the candidates. And I think more and more, even the parties are beginning to realize that it's not about partisanship anymore, that it's about values. And I think that's the main takeaway, because we have seen that be proliferated all across the country. Even the candidates who lost, even Jabari and Keith Rubino and Jimmy Connolly, who ran as a Green Party, a Democrat, and a Republican, respectively, they had massive, massive voter turnout. They had closer races than at any other time in our country's history. A Green Party candidate having any sort of chance of winning is usually unheard of in this country. And boom, Jabari comes out of nowhere and he starts raking the field from out of nowhere. Keith, he was knocking on doors, doing everything right, talking to the people, and he still ended up losing, but his voice was heard. People knew who he was and they heard his message. And the same thing with Jimmy Connolly. He ran as a Republican in a gerrymandered red district, and he earned the respect of the Republican Party and those voters as a person who has a progressive platform, which might be left-leaning, but the messaging itself, that's Eisenhower, that's FDR, that's classical conservatism or classical liberalism. That's what people are striving for, because the same things that brought us FDR and Eisenhower was the Great Depression, a war to end all wars, right? A need to overcome this poverty and this disparity that was at the hands of the wealthiest members of society. We are repeating that cycle here in a very, parallel way, if not equal way. And so we're finding ourselves in the same social demands. We need jobs, we need education, we need healthcare, we need opportunities for our young people to succeed. And that's what we're fighting for. That's what those victories tell me.
Gotcha. So I guess next question to both of you. So you both talked about sort of these grassroots movements that are coming up across the country, whether you're looking at the John Ossoff race in Georgia, whether you're looking at these House of Delegate races in Virginia, where a lot of pundits said that it was the delegate candidates who brought up the national ticket. How do you go around the country running for Congress? How do you advocate for these grassroots movements while at the same time working with the national party to try to move the party to a place where you think you can win nationwide, not only in your districts?
Tom, do you want to jump on this one, or do you want me to take point from here?
Yeah, I list myself as a Democrat, but I consider myself more of a Franklin Delano Roosevelt Democrat in terms of the Great Society and the New Deal. Johnson for the Great Society. And I expect no support from the Democratic National Committee, nor would I accept money that was filtered through the corporations. It is telling that the Democratic National Committee is having a tremendously difficult time. They're actually being held hostage by specific donors who say that until the Democratic National Committee adopts a more pacifist tone towards the wealthy and towards corporations, that they will not donate. Wonderful. Let them shoot themselves in the foot and let us off the hook. Not a clean analogy, but it's what has to happen. Taking over the party does not consist of winning every local seat and every county DEC and every state committee and national committees. It means getting candidates elected because people vote for the people rather than for the party. And when I campaign, I specifically say that I recognize the errors of both parties over the last 40, 50 years. We will not repeat those errors. We will move to publicly funded elections so that corporate money becomes a thing of the past. And we will move to single-payer health care because it's moral and economically vastly beneficial thing to do. You give everybody health care that they deserve, and you also save $1 trillion. That is how deep the corruption of our Congress, built into the laws passed since 1973, how deep and broad that corruption is.
All right.
So, can you hear me? Okay. Then, what I would say to that is, I don't necessarily believe that the party system is something that we're going to have to worry about for too terribly much longer. Right now, the reason why we depend on it is because legislation and ballot access forces people in most states to run as a Republican or a Democrat to have a chance of winning. Ohio barred Green parties and Libertarians and all the other third parties from getting on the ballot access. So how do we grassroots deal with the party structure versus our own efforts? Well, we work within our own networks. And how do we win nationally? By supporting each other across these networks. I think the major downfall of organizations like Our Revolution and Justice Democrats, Brand New Congress, Draft Bernie Sanders, Dem Enter, Dem Exit, Draft Green, Green New Deal, all these different organizations, all these different efforts, they fall short of the mark of being inclusive and creating platforms and toolkits for any candidate to use. They're too focused on creating a brand and trying to take control of their little network of candidates. So what I was thinking and what I've been advocating since running for chair of the DNC is it's not about controlling the candidate. In Louisiana, in deep South Mississippi, and Alabama, you're just not going to win as a Democrat. So even if I were the chair of the party, I would still tell my Democrats to run in the Republican primaries, to run against the incumbents, to challenge them in the only way that it makes sense. And then use that message to see if that sways the people to your side. Because every study shows that when you poll a population, they are socially liberal. They are politically liberal in terms of they want change, they want improvement. They don't want to regress, they want to progress. And so we need to find ways to work each other and support one another. And that's one of the things Our Voice does. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but there's a candidate directory on Our Voice. If you just go to the website and click on the candidate directory, it's a place where anybody can input their campaign information, their candidate, what they're running for, contact information, website, their brief platform, and where they stand on the issues. A tool like that is a godsend because normally it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to use Nation Builder or MPG Van, and that's even assuming you get access to MPG Van. If we don't have our own voter files, if we don't have our own databases and support structures with which to actually coordinate in our communities, then we can't win because we don't know who to reach out to. We don't know how to store it. We don't have a means to manipulate it. We don't have a way to share that and parcel out that information to our canvassers or to reach out to the community to just let them know who we are. We have to build our own support structures, our own databases, and control our own data. And that's what Our Voice is doing. That's what the canvassing app is doing. It's a way to truly map out your own campaign using your resources and your ability to track it. And since anybody can download it and anybody can use it, it circumvents the support that a party would possibly give you. Because now you don't have to beg the Democrats or the Republicans to help you, to give you money, to give you resources so you can hire these canvassers to re-upload into MPG Van. You can just go to your Android or iStore, download Our Voice Initiative, and start knocking on doors then and there. That's the difference. We build our own structures, we let each other know that they exist, and then we lift each other up. We have to be able to help each other, or otherwise we are going to continue to lose. We're going to continue to be fragmented. The national strategy is those with a national voice has to elevate those that are below them. And I happen to fall into that, which is why when I went on CNN, which is why when I do my live streams, I constantly talk about other candidates. I talk about Stephen Jaffe. Tim Canova, Stephanie Myers, Ryan Ross, all these people who are running for office all across the country as progressives. Some might be running as Republicans, like Lindsey Brown. Some might be running as Democrats, like Stephanie Myers. Some might be even running as independent, like Marcia Squires, who's running for, I believe, senator in Michigan. We have to continue to promote and cross-promote each other if we want to win as grassroots. Otherwise, there isn't a structure out there that can actually put all the resources and all of the support behind us so that we can win across the board. We just don't have that. That would be creating an actual third party. So in the meantime, we have to be that third party support.
Perfect. All right, so next question I'll move into. So both of you identify as progressives, and that leaning a little bit more to the left. So in a general election, if you were to both receive nominations next year, how would you appeal more to the centrist Democrats, the traditional Hillary Clinton Democrats who aren't huge fans of Bernie Sanders? How would you sort of move a little bit and talk to them directly and show them that even you as a progressive can relate to them and get their votes in the general election?
Well, Jake, I really believe that that question will have been addressed in the primary, that winning the primary, I will have secured my position with a Democratic base. They are not going to vote for Ted Yoho in the general election. So let's focus on the primary aspect of the election. And there, I think part of the answer is that the language of left and right is a media hoax, for lack of a better word, that both parties have been moving to what used to be called the right, but it's not conservative by any means. It is corporate rule. And the laws that are passed are specifically designed to benefit the corporations at the expense of the people. And to call that either left or right is fallacious. Both parties have been working to benefit the corporations. All I have to do is convince whether they're persons who've always been Republicans or always been Democrats, that I am a person, as is Sam, as are many, many other new candidates running against incumbents this year, that we are in favor of their grandchildren's success. We're in favor of them having the same opportunities, that these will not appertain if we privatize the school system, if we privatize the military and war, if we continue to gift corporations in the healthcare sector immense amounts of our money. We need to use the tax money we pay to our own benefit. And I think that message can be brought through loud and clear. Single payer being the prime example, where the numbers are very crystalline and the corruption from Congress is very deep. Incredible that we can spend $1 trillion more per year than any other country with the same size population and end up with 50 million of our fellow citizens effectively without insurance. Even people who have good insurance, if they get a debilitating disease, their child does, they will lose their job, they will lose their husband or wife because the liability of that sick child is hanging over them. When they lose their insurance, they can't get new insurance without having the advantage that Obamacare provided, which was the coverage against pre-existing conditions. So I have a son-in-law whose father could not afford to go see the doctor. And he waited till his cancer was too bad, and he died. Basically, from the expense of the visits to hospitals and doctors that he needed to do in a timely fashion. This is not a unique story. This is common across the country. And it results in us having about 1 million medical bankruptcies per year. When you stop doing that, when people understand that this is what is built into the laws, 1973 HMO Act, 1981, NIH disregarded patents that we've earned in 2003 Medicare Part D, disregarding the ability to negotiate drug prices, then you can convince rational people, and I think there are a lot of rational people. We have the commonality of wanting our children to prosper.
I mean, that's great points right there. So I will try and piggyback off of that. The question, I believe, was how do we reach the Hillary Clinton Democrats, or perhaps more party line leaning Democrats? And I would say the same question could be asked, how do we reach the Ted Cruz and the Paul Ryan and the Mitch McConnell and the Trump Republicans? I don't think we can actually reach the fringes of either party. And I say that just by reading this article. The Democratic Party is desperate for leadership, widely considering Bernie Sanders an outsider causing trouble within the party's ranks. Rather than focusing on developing a policy based on message to resonate with voters or working to develop a more diverse pool of candidates, many established Democrats are pushing for a Biden 2020 run to recycle the former vice president into a contemporary voice for the party. It's that kind of rhetoric and that kind of logic that the party isn't at fault. It's the progressivism, it's the division that the Bernie Sanders wing of the liberal side of the country is tearing the Democratic Party apart. And then you see the Donna Brazils of the party saying, no, it was rigged and Hillary Clinton was complicit, and then they walk it back. Elizabeth Warren tried to wave that flag and then she walks it back. What we aren't seeing enough of is that among the leadership of the parties, you can't reach them. I tried. I tried, and I think during the race I succeeded, but then afterwards I was brushed aside as yet another troublemaker. And that's fine. What I've learned since then is that marketing is about catering to the extreme fringe of your message, and that'll draw 50% of those who are undecided with you. So follow me on this. If the Democratic Party right now is to push Joe Biden or Kamala Harris for president in 2020, what is that saying? They're trying to find a middle of the road argument, something that people can be like, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, absolutely. Androids are cell phones. Yep, I absolutely agree. And OtterBox, it makes cell phone cases, absolutely on board. Whereas what they should be doing is saying, Android mixed with an OtterBox is like the best thing since the Nokia from back in 1990. Like, these things are indestructible. Look, I can chuck it against a wall and it'll put a hole in the wall and you can still take your phone and text. And people are gonna be like, yes, Android, OtterBox. And then a quarter of the population is like, no, iPhone's better with, you know, the cool, like the zebra print and like the hearts, and I can print like my face on here. Like, that's so much better than Android. You're gonna lose those iPhone and those Apple users and you know, the custom case people. But who you're gonna win is that fringe of them that aspires to the Android in the first place, and you're gonna win a major majority because that's something to stand behind. It is an actual thought, it's an actual belief, it's an actual stance that people aren't just like, huh, you got a point. It's like, no, you're right. Like, that is an awesome thing to say. We're going Android. It's marketing. That's why when you see Coca-Cola or Pepsi commercials, or, I mean, damn, pick anything out there that has some sort of advertising, it's never the, well, you could use this brand or this brand, and the difference between our brand is that we're, you know, 10 cents cheaper. It's like, no, Charmin Ultra is like wiping your fanny with angel feathers. And if you get the other stuff, it's like using sandpaper. Like, it's extreme marketing. It's propaganda. But propaganda is what matters to our country. It's what affects the common citizen the most effectively. And it's unfortunate. And I don't agree with that personally. I think people should just be able to look and be like, this is person A, person B, person C. This is where they stand on the issues. Cool. I subscribe with that, and let's vote for them. Ideally, that's how that works. So the question being, again, how do we reach those Hillary Clinton supporters? We don't. We continue to be unapologetic in our convictions, and either we bring some of them along or we don't. But we know where we stand on the issues, and we know where they stand on the issues, and we know where the Republicans stand on their issues. If we're going to win, we're going to win on issues, not with branding. And that's the identity politics that, as a country, we are slowly, not quickly, but slowly pushing away from. People are still going to vote along party lines. That's just a given. Which brings me back to my earlier point about gerrymandering and going after the incumbents. If you're in a red district, run as a Republican. Do it. Run as a Republican and be unapologetic progressive. You will go against the entire Republican machine. You'll go against the entire Democratic machine. But on the off chance you win your primary, you know that the Republicans are going to go all in for you. Whereas with the Democratic Party, the Hillary Clinton supporters per se, if you win the Democratic primary as an unapologetic progressive, you still might not get their support. There's been examples of this throughout the country, even for Congress, where the congressional candidate won the primary, requested access to NPG van, and they still didn't get it, except for 3 weeks before the vote was being held. Tools and resources are the issue. The parties are holding on to them with an iron fist, and it's up to us to reach people directly. We can't reach those who don't want to be reached. We have to make sure that our message is heard, that it is understood, and that we don't change it throughout our entire campaign, like the Elizabeth Warrens, like the Donna Brazils, like the Tom Perez's, and like the other leadership in both parties. They say something, they get a lot of support, and then the bigwigs up top say, no, you need to get back in line, and then they walk back their statements. How do we get the people on either fringe? By standing by our convictions.
Sam, I agree with your points wholeheartedly. I didn't understand every bit of what you said through my headphone, so I may be off base on some of these comments, but you'll forgive me, I hope. What I'd like to throw into the conversation is my sense of utter urgency. I have a PhD in physics. I don't know beans about climate science, but I know about how you do science, what gets published, and I know that everything that's published about climate science has been conservatively addressed, because when you're publishing into a climate of denial, you fudge your parameters in your code to be conservative. Every single checkable prediction has turned out to be conservative, that the actuality on the ground year by year is worse than what the scientists are predicting. And what people like Steve Hawking are predicting is that if we don't eliminate fossil fuels from our energy mix by 2027, we will all die. The species will become extinct. So there are no cycles to go through before we have to take control of the government. It is essential that we have control of the House in 2018. We elect a Speaker of the House who is progressive. That requires probably over 150 progressive members of the House. We have to be the majority of the majority to decide who the Speaker is, and we have to pray that we can impeach Trump and Pence at that time and start running the country the right way, because the executive orders, the agency regulations that are coming down are killing people. They are redefining the social structure in ways that are absolutely incomprehensible to normal human beings. And if we can't present that to both Republicans and Democrats, then the fault is ours. I tell everybody I speak to, if you like what I'm saying, if you see the necessity of this, you have to talk to tell your friends. We don't have to have a lot of money. The structure that our voice is building is fundamentally important, but even more so is that in 2019, on January 5th, on the first day that we convene, we pass an Anti-Corruption Act, which gives every American voter a voucher for $100. That puts $30 billion at play in an election cycle. And that voucher money can only be given to candidates who sign a pledge, legally binding, that they will not take other contributions. And I am suggesting to the people who are organizing this act, who have written the act, which is available at anticorruptionact.org, our Represent Us is the group that is pushing this act. I've suggested to them that they call such voucher candidates straight era candidates, and they get the message secured by copyright so that the other guys will have to come up with what they want to be called. You know, I'm okay if they want to call themselves Broken Era, Crooked Era, or Corporate Shills, or whatever, but let's take the ground from underneath them, run a message and values-based principle campaign where we define what is a candidate that represents people by the funding. 2018, we have to elect our own people. We have to pay enough, walk enough, knock enough doors, call enough people that we get 150 people into the House. And then we can do all this stuff. We don't wait a moment because there's not a moment to spare. It's not like a giant meteor is rushing towards Earth and everybody can see the prediction and work together. We will be working in a declining environment with an increasing number of refugees knocking at our doors because they don't want to see their children starve to death. And the end game is the end. So if we don't do it now, people will not remember us. There won't be people. Now, I hope that I'm overstating that, but I doubt that seriously. So we have to do this with all our energy right now and take the test and pass the test. And I'm optimistic because I don't believe we're going to kill our grandchildren.
And I'm inclined to agree with you that this can happen every 2 years. We can clean the House of Representatives every single 2 years because they're always up for re-election. Same thing with the Senate. Every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. We can do this in as early as 6 years and have a fully progressive, a fully we the people Congress, as in the House and the Senate. The thing is, and I'm not discrediting what you're saying. Like, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to go out there. We need to go rallying to the streets, knocking on doors, getting organized, getting activated, and just doing the work. Unfortunately, it's been my experience that is far easier said than done. And the problem is there are agencies and there are organizations that want to control those efforts. And I'm not just talking about the major parties. I'm talking about even these activist groups, even these progressive orgs. They want to hold their events and they want to make sure they hold on to their data. If we truly want a free election that's open and fair, as in everybody has the same playing field, the vouchers, the Anti-Corruption Act notwithstanding, then we need to be open source about the way we run our campaigns as well. And again, there are tools out there. There's the Our Voice canvassing app and the candidate directory. There's the Bernie-crats vetting form. There's the Justice Democrats who are going to support 50 candidates for Congress and bring new Congress who I think are going to do something similar. So great. We know that these little organizations, these different areas are tools at our disposal. Now we need to proliferate it. Now we need to stop drawing lines in the sand. There's too many hashtags focusing on one path versus the other. And what it's doing is it's conflicting with the goal of what you just said. Reform, takeover. We need to protest. And then we need to go home from those protests and knock on doors for those local candidates, whether they're running for governorships, whether they're running for Senate, Congress, county commissioner, or a freaking school board. After the activism, we need to go and do the supporting on the door knocking and the mailers and the phone banking and just sharing their posts. We have to be all in. And here's the thing. There are 270 million Americans in this country who are 18 years or older. Not all of them are registered to vote, but they should be. They could be. So if we can get out the vote, if we can get, I think only like 150 million people are even registered to vote or something. It's not very many. It's not a large percentage of that 270. If we can get closer to that 100% voter registration and then get even 50% voter turnout from that, we would double or triple or in some cases quintuple, quadruple our voter turnouts. That is what our goal needs to be, is getting everybody who's like, I don't know if it's worth it. I mean, I have to work. I have to take care of the kids. You know, once I get home from work, my wife has to take the work. And we have to make it simple for them. If people need to go to work or watch their kids or do whatever so they can vote, then we need to be available to make sure that they can do that. Pooling our resources, getting those early daycare centers to push for petitions so that they can be like, for election day only, free childcare for parents who want to vote. You know, we do need to make those kind of pushes at the local levels. That is not something that we will succeed at the state or even the national level. That's where you go to your mayor. That's where you go to your city councilman. That's where you go to the county commissioner, and you go to their offices and you submit those petitions to them saying, we need to make this a holiday and we need to create a support structure for these people who can't vote because they have to either support their children or go to work. We need to find a way to get the word out that there's early voting, mail-in ballot reading, what have you. That's how we overcome this disparity, by showing people that there are other options. So,
well, Sam, I absolutely agree with you. What I'm offering for your consideration is the possibility that the voter voucher system is the first tool to accomplish universal voting, universal registration, perhaps even requiring that people vote, even if they vote for none of the above. Because I think one of the defining characteristics of progressives is that we want everybody to vote. If you don't want everyone to vote, if you want to select who your voters are, you're probably not a progressive, and this is simply a tool. Let me mention that in Seattle and 4 states, including Connecticut, they've done a voter voucher kind of system. Connecticut was the first example of that I know, and it passed like 2003. And very quickly, 76% or more of the elected officials in Connecticut became voter voucher funded candidates. And I think they probably represented the people of Connecticut better than Rick Scott, even Rick Scott is doing down here. And if you tell me I look like Rick Scott, no, this conversation's over.
no, that would never happen. But I agree with you. And the candidates who signed the pledge, there's, please share me that link, because I'm not entirely sure I've seen that link or I've heard of this organization. There's more organizations out there that are doing the same thing. The one that I just got into contact with, let's see, sorry, signed contract, it's called Candidates with a Contract. So it's that simple. And I guess I can't share screen, right? Yeah, okay. So basically what it says is this organization is called the Citizens Coalition for Democratization. And it's candidate contract for the U.S. House of Representatives. You fill it out and it says Section 1, fair elections, or Section 1, Article 1, overturn Citizens United's, Article 2, public campaign financing, Article 3, finance reform, Section 2, anti-corruption, 7-year employment ban for firms that employ lobbyists, and partisan gerrymandering. And then, you know, it just goes on and on and on. Like you said, this anti-corruption pledge. But it takes to the next step. It makes a real contract out of it. And honestly, this might even be legislative in nature, or could be turned into legislation. This is absolutely along the lines of what we're talking about. But you might not have heard of Sign the Contract with, you know, the Citizens Coalition. I know I didn't hear of them until I happened to stumble across them on Facebook. And I didn't hear about your anti-corruption pledge until you just mentioned it here. So what we have to do is get that message out there and share it. If we know of candidates, then we need to pass it on to them, and they need to do the same thing. Because then that connectivity, that brand, that center point brings us all together. If we all sign this Citizens Coalition, if we all sign up for the candidate directory, if we all sign the pledge, we can look for these things on our candidates and promote that across all of our social media networks. And people will then understand, it's like, oh, these 3 things is something that this guy signed. This is the guy who's going to represent me. That's going to be the one who represents my family, my children. This contract, this pledge, and being in this directory, this is how we know that they're fighting for us. Because you know damn well that Mitch McConnell ain't going to sign that. You know Debbie Wasserman Schultz, they aren't going to sign those things, because they are part of the problem. So we will, and we have no qualms about it, and we have a larger understanding of how these networks work. We know how to utilize social media, and this can go through like wildfire. That's, I think, how we combine those different avenues to get progressives and grassroots candidates elected.
Well, Sam, I agree with all the things that you said there. I would add one more thing, which I think is of use, to plan for success. That what that means to me is I plan on there being a progressive majority, progressive presence that is large enough to strike fear into the hearts of the incumbents that remain. And part of that is to pre-sponsor bills. I'm going to Democratic Candidate Conference in Washington, D.C. in January, and I hope to be getting a meeting together with the other congressional candidates and agree to pre-sponsor specific bills like the Off Fossil Fuels Act from Tulsi Gabbard, the 676, the single-payer health care. And if we could show people who are voting a few months later that we have enough weight to pass these bills as soon as we get there, then we have done something. And we have shown what the power of this midterm will be. And I agree with your earlier comment that it is quite possible that the turnout for this midterm will be comparable to what was seen in the general election past.
All right, so I'll jump back in here real fast. So moving on with the point that we've been discussing. So both of you have some really broad policy goals and ideas, a lot of ideas. So one thing, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So one thing that we've seen so far with the Trump administration is you have a lot of Republicans who aren't in the same group, you would say. You have Tea Party Republicans more to the right. You have incumbent Republicans who might be more to the middle and the center, I might say, and they've really struggled to get things passed. So how, if you both go into Congress next year with your progressive ideas, how do you find a middle ground with the rest of the Democratic Party and even some Republicans to get things passed? Because at the end of the day, it is about getting bills passed. So how would you approach finding a middle ground where you don't lose your ideals, but while also finding a way to get bills passed at the end of the day?
I will bring my hammer of cooperation and compromise. No, just kidding. And in all honesty, I think, and I don't mean to cut you off, Tom, if you were about to speak. It's a matter of finding out what is the hill you're willing to die on. And I'm going to use that extreme rhetoric for a reason. My hills include universal health care. It includes universal education. It includes economic reform and tax reform to benefit the middle class. It includes getting rid of all of the fraud and waste in the military budget. It includes true equity and equality for women and minorities. Those are the hills that I'm willing to die on, that I will fight for tooth and nail. Will I accept incrementalization? Will I accept, say, tuition forgiveness? I will. Will I accept raising student loan tax rates in favor of, I don't know, lowering carbon emissions? Absolutely not. We need both. We need to get rid of the tuition and we need to lower carbon emissions. It's like with the death penalty. I went on my social media very recently and I said, I do support the death penalty. I think there is a time and a place for it in our justice system. But that doesn't change the fact that our justice system, and especially our policing, is in itself in desperate need of reform. When cops can get administrative leave for murdering an innocent civilian and then be cleared of charges and then not be fired from their precinct or be put on any sort of blacklist, that's a problem. When judges are sending young black men to prison for 30 years for marijuana possession, but giving young white men who might be affluent, who might not, a slap on the wrist for the same exact charge, that's corruption. And both need to be addressed. But that doesn't change the fact that the death penalty might have a place. So where's the hill I die on there? If we abolish the death penalty entirety, but in return, we get universal health care and education, or Medicare for all and tuition forgiveness, or some sort of education benefit and some sort of health care benefit, but we get rid of the death penalty, I will sign that bill in a heartbeat. That's the difference of what's compromising and what's not. Yes, there has to be a middle ground somewhere, right? Because right now we have an extreme of liberalism and an extreme of conservatism. And nothing's getting done because everybody's drawing lines in the sand. So we have to be able to say, all right, you don't want to give us universal health care. I'm going to push for universal health care, but I will settle for Medicare for all. I will settle for getting rid of the fine at the end of the year if you don't have health insurance. I'm willing to settle for standardizing the cost of health care. Anything that'll actually get us closer to universal health care would be something that I support. But not if it's in favor of, in addition to that, it's like giving laws like fair gun rights, ending abortions, and I don't know, implementing voter ID laws all across the country. Those 4 things are unacceptable for even moderate healthcare change. And that's the decisions we would have to make as congressmen, as representatives. We can't just go all in for one idea and just refuse to look at any of the other options. And just because one good idea might be in that bill of 99 horrible ideas doesn't mean we support it because of that one idea.
Sam, you're right on target with a lot of things. I disagree as to which are the most fundamental things, but we're all on the same page as to all of these things being important. The discussion starts, though, from a strange viewpoint. It's kind of the NPR viewpoint that there should be compromise. Well, the bills that are being considered in our Congress are the most extreme and extraordinarily hideous bills ever presented in Congress. There's not a question of the Republicans' ability to pass a working budget. They have the majority, but they are passing things that are so extremely and immediately are attempting to pass things that are so extremely destructive that 1 or 2 senators will balk. And thank God for that. But that is not the way government should be running. They should not ever be considering bills like that. We got to renormalize the conversation where you identify that these bills are highly destructive. People are saying, well, will that be a small tax decrease for the middle class? Well, maybe it may be more tax, but you buy that tax cut at the cost of giving up the lives of your grandparents and of the disabled couple next door, or your disabled child, as you cut Medicare and Medicaid, in order to give yourself a $50 a year or $200 a year tax cut, and the millionaires get $1 million a year tax cut, and the people of Medicare get a $1,500 per year reduction, every single one of them. That's how much the reduction in Medicare is spoken of, passed by the House, signed off by Trump, amounts to in each of the 10 years coming. They will then say, as they say of the VA, this system is not working. It's because it's government. Well, you have bad government when you elect people who say government is bad. It's a campaign promise, effectively. If you don't put good people into the regulatory agencies, if you don't put good people who want to work for the people rather than for the corporations, this is what you get. And we have to get that message out loud and clear, and we win. If we don't win, we deserve what we get.
And I would even piggyback a little further. You're right, with the bills that are being passed are reprehensible, and maybe I was giving examples of what good bills might even look like, where we would still argue about, what is good and what's not. You're right. What we do need is a consensus that good bills need to start being passed. The only way that that's going to happen is by electing good people to office who actually want to pass that kind of thing. That doesn't mean that even if we had a supermajority, this wouldn't be a conversation. Say we had 49% of control. That would mean we would need to sway 2%. We would need to sway 2% of the remaining voting senators and congressional congressmen to vote for our bill. So what would those compromises look like? You're right. That's more of a conversation that you'd have to look at. What is the pro and the con of the bill? And if the benefit is far more for corporatists, the elite, and the wealthy, then it's not a good bill. It's just not. And if the benefit is greater for the common citizenry, then it's a good bill. But what if that is really a toss-up between 49 and 51? Is that still a good bill? And no, that's where the compromise comes into play. It's like, all right, fine. We have a decent bill here that benefits people more than does corporations. What can we do on this side of the bill so that we can make it help people more, but also not necessarily harm corporations? Because that's what ends up happening, right? They're worried about trickle down not happening. Now that's a whole different argument, but it's just like with the Me Too hashtag. So many people were getting offended that they weren't able to say, well, me too. Yeah, I'm a guy. That happened to me. It's like, no, this is for women. And then you get this attack. People suffer from sexual assault and sexual harassment every single day. Just like with these bills, we suffer from, there is good stuff in bad bills and there's bad stuff in good bills. And yet people just want to nitpick which one of those things are. We have to focus on how to make it an overall good. Even if it is in favor of corporations, there's probably something that we can do for bigger businesses that helps them without hurting the smaller businesses or citizens. You know, I'm realistic and pragmatic and big picture enough to understand that there could be things that adversely affect businesses that don't have to, that benefit people. I'm just saying, I can see where arguments are made. Well, we have to be able to understand that if we get those kinds of bills, we can find a halfway ground of not harming businesses, but still helping people. If it's about improving healthcare and still letting it be sort of privatized, we're gonna have to take steps. So fine, keep your privatization, but make it a mandatory max. Put a cap to what a premium could be. Wouldn't that in itself save a lot of people a lot of money? Let's say the cap was you can't charge one person more than $250 a month. That would save many, many people hundreds of dollars each month, because I know people who are paying $750 a month, $1,100 a month. We still have privatized insurance in that bill, but it's benefiting people significantly more than the company. It's like you said, it's a very hard question to talk about, and really predicates along how much of a voice do we have as progressives? Are we talking 5 elected people or 5%? Because that's a significant difference. You know, the bigger our voice, the louder our voice, the likelier it is that we can get that shift to come across.
Sam, if I might make a comment, one of the things I learned in the campaign last year was that if I talked about, with Republicans in particular, about how much this would benefit them or that would not benefit them, how it will help these people and that people, they did not like that discussion. What they wanted me to talk to was values. And the ability to couch your arguments in terms of values also offers some clarity in judging the relative merits of the bills that you were talking about. If you can make a values-based argument, it's probably a better bill than if you can't. So an example of a values-based argument is phosphate mining. That's an issue in my district. The landowners and the big corporations say, our property rights are sacred. And in response, I say, I absolutely agree with you. And your neighbor's property rights are sacred. And even more than that, the right of his children to have clean air to breathe without radon exposure, decreasing their potentials in life, without the land they own being degraded by the silt and radioactive chemicals that end up in the water. And they have not an argument in response. So when you take the message into a values configuration rather than a better for you, worse for you, reduces income distribution, it is a mistake to talk about the inequality of income distribution, because it actually arises from the failure to implement real capitalism, by which I mean to distinguish from what's called free market capitalism, fair market capitalism, where it's not capitalism if you don't have companies competing with their goods and services for your money. It's not capitalism if you don't have good market information, and that's denied by treaties like NAFTA and the investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms built into that. There are other principled arguments that national sovereignty, which is absolutely disrupted by ISDS. So when you couch your arguments in these terms, I presume that you will still keep the Democrats. I know that you will do better with the Republicans. And the effect in terms of passable legislation I expect to be marked, but that will mostly be the result of electing people who don't take corporate money.
I think that's a great way to end it. At least that question is the best way to really pass legislation that doesn't require too much compromise or bending over backwards to come up with phrasing and verbiage that these other, elected officials can stomach is to get our people elected. So, Tom Wells, I'm right behind you, fighting that fight. I lead the way.
Sam, it was a pleasure making a real acquaintance with you. I look forward to repetitions of this interchange.
Likewise. I didn't mean to say that we're done. I mean, if we're done, we're done. I'm good all night.
Oh, yeah. As you wish.
So I think we have some time for a few more questions. So going back to something that was discussed a little earlier on impeaching the president. So there's been a lot of discussion recently about should impeaching the president be part of the Democrats' national messaging? What would you say to that question? And if you do favor that, please explain why.
I'll totally jump in on that one. The impeaching Trump as a national platform, if that isn't sensationalism, if that isn't just, I don't even know what to call that. Hubris, arrogance, just Trump is the symptom, not the disease. The symptom, or I'm sorry, the disease is corruption that's permeating in both parties, the lobbying industry, the fact that corporations control the election process and even the legislative writing process. I mean, these organizations like ALEC, they are corporations who go into back rooms with elected officials, and those people tell the elected person, this is the bill that you are going to propose and that you're going to say you wrote. Putting Trump's impeachment on there is like saying we should have a national platform that every Tuesday should be Pink Tutu Day. It makes no sense. Secondly, you get rid of Trump, there better be a plan to get rid of Pence, Ryan, McConnell, Sessions, and all of the other corrupt, horrific individuals that are currently serving and that would be in that line of succession for the presidency. Because you get rid of Trump, you get Pence. And you know what Pence is? A better and more articulate version of Trump. That's it. A more articulate version of Trump. That's Pence. Paul Ryan, he might be a talking head, but he's still not any better. We got to go down the entire list if we're going to go through it at all. But to make that your rallying cry, it goes against exactly what people showed they care about in the 2016 election was they want to build something. They don't want to vote against or fight against something. People want something to believe in and to build. And believing in tearing somebody down is simply not enough. It's been proven that it's not enough. Actually, I'll end with this. If the Democrats go with a national platform to impeach Trump, the Republicans should go with a national platform to put Hillary Clinton in prison. That is exactly how idiotic and childish that would go. Sorry.
Sam, I agree with you that campaigning on impeachment is absurd, but I think it is important that we replace Paul Ryan because the potentiality for impeachment exists. And once we replace Paul Ryan, then there'll be a lot more pressure on Trump and Pence to not do such egregious damage that would lead to their impeachment. So I see that as a safety valve. Right now, the Republican Party, by which I mean their corporate sponsors, would be delighted in most respects if Trump were impeached. In terms of the power and effectiveness of the messaging and their ability to pass legislation, that's probably enhanced with Pence or with Paul Ryan. So, yeah, it's not, as you said, the disease, it is but the last symptom of the disease, the most arrogantly aggressive manifestation of that disease, but both parties have manifested this disease. The distinction now, and I think it is revolutionary, is that we have progressives who will represent the people, and the token of that is their disregard of corporate funding and of national party funding. If I say I'm a D or an R, and I'm not beholden to the party in any respect, I remain myself.
All right, and back to that first message, I bring that up because I saw that Nancy Pelosi last week did also agree with both of you that impeaching the president should not be a central message of the Democratic Party. So let's move on to healthcare. So both of you have talked about single-payer healthcare and your support for that. Senator Sanders did introduce a bill recently with a lot of Democratic co-signers to get single-payer healthcare. And this was a contentious debate within the Democratic primary last year. Should we move to single-payer healthcare, or should we work to fix Obamacare and strengthen it? So do you believe there is a way to do both, that you can move to single-payer healthcare without completely getting rid of Obamacare, or do you think you have to scrap Obamacare to build a new single-payer healthcare system?
Let me take that. I've been studying healthcare for an immense amount of time. My father was a doctor and suffered grievously from the lack of single-payer healthcare, which was being passed around the world at that time, and it worked beautifully around the world since that time, 50 years ago. The original Obamacare was an improvement over what existed previously, but it remained a gifting program to health insurance corporations. We are the only country in the world with for-profit health insurance companies. That only happened by an HMO Act passed and signed by Nixon in 1973. Before that, for-profit medical groups, for-profit health insurance, for-profit hospitals were all illegal and undreamed of. So it's not like we are going into new territory. The continuing sabotage by the Republican Party, very intentional sabotage of ACA, has left us no possibility of defending ACA, which I would not have defended anyway. To defend ACA, Obamacare, is an act of political suicide. To not aggressively seek the best system is self-defeating. Now, the political climate is such that the big media people representing the corporations, as always, are already building a second line of defense. And that line of defense is to say, well, yeah, we're going to do single payer, but we need to delay it 4 or 5 years for a transition that is gradual and doesn't shock the system. And in fact, I believe the Senate bill sponsored by Bernie Sanders does that. My impression, not sharply defined, is that the House bill, H.R. 676, does it more immediately. The state bill in New York that has been considered and brilliantly analyzed by Gerald Friedman, who I was speaking to in New York in January, shows that if you do it in a single motion in a single year, in just the state of New York, and despite not having the advantages that accrue legally to controlling the system at the federal level, you can still, in the first year, save $42 billion, which across the nation translate into $1 trillion. And you do this despite spending maybe $90 million taking care of the 3 million people who are employed by hospitals and insurance companies, competing and code matching, with the result being hospitals' profits and health insurance companies' profits are the target of battle, and the care of the patient is tertiary, not even secondary. So we have to get rid of those systems. We have to put them out of our misery immediately. And I am non-negotiably in favor of an instantaneous healthcare system as a way of demonstrating how corrupt this system is, as well as saving 100,000 lives per year due to inadequate insurance presently. it is morally incorrigible that we would delay a transition to what we know should be done and only kill 80,000 people the second year and 60,000 people the third year, etc. No, what is morally demanded can be espoused without hesitation. And I do so.
I mean, I can't disagree with any of that. I agree. I've done not research nearly quite as extensive as you have, to be sure, and I will never claim to be a subject matter expert on universal health care, but I'm good with numbers. I'm good with Excel spreadsheets, and I'm good with data. And the numbers do not lie. There are several different studies that show that the cost of healthcare in this country is not equal, even in your district. So like, say you live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and there are at least, let's just say there's a dozen hospitals or medical facilities that could handle a broken bone. So I broke my hand and I need to go get it fixed. Each and every single facility out there will have a different price. Not only will they have a different price, they will have a different multiplier of that price, which means not only are they charging you, say, $500 for your hand, they're going to multiply it by 2.1 or 1.86 or 3.1, something ludicrous like that. It is reprehensible that such a thing even exists. If we're going to charge for a broken hand, it should be the same way no matter where you are in the country. I don't care if you're in California. I don't care if you're in deep South Louisiana. I don't care if you're in part of the U.S. territories in Puerto Rico. You should be charging the same thing. But here's the kicker. With that revenue stream, it determines how much Medicare money you get, right? So the more money you make, the more money you get from Medicare. Here's the kicker, and it's unconscionable. If you divide the revenue of any given hospital in this country by its multiplier and subtract what they actually got from Medicare, the out-of-pocket costs 50% of the time are nothing. Like, you would be paid to go to the hospital. They would be negative. And then the other 50%, it would be so nominal. You'd be spending $25 to get cancer treatment. 3,000 patients in the Fairfield Medical Center, my hometown, and their average out-of-pocket cost would have been, I believe, negative $7. That is the difference between a profit-based healthcare system and what universal healthcare can do. And like you said, we would save money instantly.
And what everybody understands that health insurance companies and big pharma are significant profit centers, and they constitute wealth care much more than health care. The other part of that three-legged stool are the not-for-profit hospitals, which are actually, as you were testifying in individual examples, immensely profitable. In Florida, there, I believe, 10 or 11 hospitals where the cost to a patient who enters a hospital without insurance is 10 times or more what the cost is for a patient with insurance. So an intermediate step might be to demand that no hospital or doctor be allowed to charge an uninsured person more than he charges an insured person. That would completely disrupt the insurance industry. That'd be a nice prelude to getting rid of them entirely.
Right, so just to continue this conversation, my next question could definitely be a 3-hour discussion on its own. But if how do you pay for single-payer healthcare? And 2, how do you convince enough other people that this system is better than what we already have, or better than a healthcare system that has nothing to do with the government, that is completely privately funded?
I was going to say, Tom, can I jump in on this one first? And then please jump in after. The cost to healthcare could be achieved right now with the current budget and the current levels of Medicare that's being allocated in the federal budget. It's approximately $1.1 trillion. And if you standardize the cost of healthcare, if you got rid of the multipliers, you would be able to cover every single cost, every single medical expense in this country today without raising a single cent more in taxes. That's just a fact.
What's interesting is that is also a line of defense in the media, the scare tactic that you can't afford this. Yeah, it would be nice, but it's just totally out of range for a country that's so broke as we are. And the facts absolutely belie this. There was the most extreme example of this disingenuous reporting was an op-ed saying that even Gerald Friedman, who I quoted earlier in the debate, says that single payer would cost $14 trillion over the next 10 years. Well, that's true. The guy did fail to notice that if we don't do single payer, we will spend $38 trillion over the next 10 years, which by my calculation is more. So there's no question of paying for single payer. The right question is, do we want to continue giving unearned profits to health insurance companies, big pharma, and hospitals?
One extra thing to that. One of the canvassing and the pitch techniques that I've done when going door to door is saying, you're against socialized medicine because you're a conservative and you don't believe in socialism, you don't believe that government should be in control of your healthcare. You're already paying for it. It's already coming out of your wages. No matter who you are in this country, you are paying into Medicare. So that is already taking a collective pool of money from everybody who earns a paycheck in this country and putting it in one source. What's the difference between that and an insurance company who has hundreds or thousands or millions of premiums from individuals who are paying into it and putting it into that pool? The difference is that money is going to a CEO, it's going into advertisement, it's going into overhead, and it's going into very little in research and development and improving medications and improving your healthcare. That's the difference between this pool of money and this pool of money. This pool of money, your tax dollars ensure that you go to the hospital, you get treated, you go home, no debt. This one says you're going to pay monthly, then you're going to go to the hospital and pay a deductible and some sort of percentage of the fee, and then you're going to be held responsible for whatever you couldn't cover right up front, and then your premiums are going to go up. And oh, by the way, we're going to also set lifetime caps. So if you happen to get cancer, you better not spend more than $500,000, except 5 treatments of chemo hits you to your maximum.
Well, that's a wonderful discussion. I'm jumping in on top of you, Sam.
No, you're good. I mean, that's my point. That's the way I explain it to conservatives or people who are against the word socialism. It's like, call it whatever you want. Call it turning the government into a big bag of money. Call it using your tax dollars for yourself. Talk about whatever you want to call it. You're paying into this. It's $1.1 trillion. You're paying into this. It's also like, I think $1.4 trillion. And you don't get any of the same benefit. You're still paying out of pocket to use it. No out of pocket in addition to the out of pocket.
Well, let me suggest a couple of ways that are more values-based languages that I've learned from talking to Republicans. My opponent, Ted Yoho, I had a half-hour talk with him and told him all sorts of facts and stories about how the present system was failing people and bankrupting people and allowing people to die. And his closing remark was, Tom, we got to have personal responsibility. I didn't have a ready answer, but I do now. Here's what personal responsibility means to me. If you're going to have a child, you should be prepared for the worst case delivery. Your child might be in the hospital for 6 months. It might cost $500,000 for his treatment there. Are you going to have $500,000 before you impregnate your wife? Some of us won't do that. So what does personal responsibility then translate to? Maybe it means getting together with your friends and neighbors and pooling your resources so that whichever one of you has the misfortune of this child that demands so much care, you'll have taken care of him with very little loss to yourself. And you can be so happy that it's not your child, and that you're taking care of the other child. Well, now, single payer just recognizes that we are one family in this country, and we are pooling our resources to take care of each other. That, to me, is the simplest explanation. Now, a more problematic personage I encountered just last week at a Republican job fair, and they said, I don't want my premiums taking care of somebody else. I don't want my insurance covering other people who don't deserve it. So you'd rather get sick and take advantage of all that good insurance you have? Be happy that you can take care of other people, and that you are not the one suffering. This is not too hard of ask.
I think we can only agree on that. It shouldn't be too hard of an ask, and we can definitely play into the family values aspect of everything too, that socialized medicine or popular medicine, maybe that's a better word. Maybe we should just call it popular medicine instead of a social program. Popular medicine ensures that if you get sick or if you get hurt or you can't provide for your family, they're still taken care of. I think you're absolutely right. Maybe it's just the verbiage, because obviously we can't spend, 5 minutes talking to everybody at the door. We'd be here until next election cycle. Maybe that's the thing we need to do. We need to call it popular medicine.
Language is important, and the perfect messaging in this has eluded me. If I have time to talk with people, I can make progress with most people. It's the people who can't stand to hear you answer their questions, who cut you off in mid-sentence. That 10% of the people I give up on. But I get them to interrupt me 3 times before I give up on them.
All right, so moving into a new topic, education. So these days, especially for college students, student loans are a major concern for people my age. I know friends who have had to turn down job offers because the city that the job is in, they just can't afford to live there and pay down their student loans at the same time. Last year during the general election, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton worked on a college tuition plan, but many people farther to the left said it didn't go far enough. Some people more in the center said it was too far. So what are your ideas regarding education and how to relieve student loan and free education, perhaps? What are your thoughts in this area?
My thought is that it is the cheapest and most efficient utilization of our resources. People say, how are you going to pay for it? The cost of free public university and free preschool for all is about $70 billion. Well, once we save $1 trillion on healthcare, I think we can probably come up with the $70 billion right out of that. And does that make sense? Well, it makes sense in every other country of the Western world, of Western Europe. There are 1 million American students going to tuition-free school, taking 1,100 different courses in Germany and English. And about half of them decide to stay in Germany because that's what the Germans are counting on, that they educate the people, and some of the people, about half, really like it. And these are not the stupidest Americans. They have figured out how to get a free education. It's available in almost every European country. We have great schools, but if we continue to pay adjunct professors at dog walker wages, we will not have great schools, and that is in the plan. We have corporate funding of chairs in prestigious universities, and they have selection powers over the people who get those chairs, and that is no longer a prestigious university. It's not worthy of the reputation it enjoys. There are numerous examples in the science field I could quote, but that takes us too far afield. We have to give ourselves the ability to have an education, but we're going in exactly the opposite direction. And this has to be spoken to in campaigns right now, that the proposal is that we will start taxing graduate student stipends that we will start taxing the interest that you pay on your student loan. And that's in order to create the revenue that we can give to the top 300 families in the country. So if you can't win on that observation, the college population's vote, you lose, and you deserve to lose. And we as a country cease to have any primacy.
So the education debate, what gets me is that we continue to cut our public funding. We continue to put more emphasis on sports and extracurriculars. And we continue to rewrite history in our curriculums to be passing a test rather than preparing our young people for a future. So it's not even that it's morally reprehensible that these candidates or that these lawmakers don't even support public education. It's that they don't even support quality education, whether it's private or otherwise, because all of these charter schools are not obligated to provide a better quality service. They are simply there to provide the service of education and meet whatever minimum standard. And if they happen to fall out, guess what? They get an insurance plan that is paid out of our tax dollars, which means not only is that money taken away from public schools, it's being taken away from them twice. And then those schools continue to flounder and fail, which means they get even less money. So that's 3. And then 4, if they don't have money to begin with and they continue to get less, then they start getting fined because they're not meeting standards. That is the fundamental problem. Education should get as much funding or more than the military. I mean, what are we protecting? What are we fighting in this country, if not our future? And to me, education is the future. I get it. We might agree or disagree on what the education should look like. I think a healthy mix of the German system, the Finnish system, and the Japanese system is what we could do in America. The German system allows you to choose your path in the 4th grade. That's way too early, in my opinion. But, Americans can do it at the 9th grade, where you can graduate in the 9th or 10th grade and then go on the unskilled labor path. Or you can get a vocation and a skill and graduate towards the 10th or the 11th grade and then go towards your path. Or you can go and finish all 12 years or 13 years of primary school and go on the college path and get a degree. I think that's one of the best ways to at least align our education system with the needs and the wants of our students. But because this is America, if you choose one path or the other, you should be able to go through the others, assuming you can meet the requirements. We just need to better standards. That's where the Japanese comes into play. The Japanese is all about meeting standards, like we are with tests, but more so with full character, morality, and educational acumen. So we cater the curriculum towards a future up to the 9th grade, and then we start partitioning and focusing that education on the needs of the students at that time. With the Finnish process, they take out the homework, they lower the school day, and they give students time to breathe and to relax, because even employees, they get breaks. You and I will not sit and do just mindless work or just listen to your boss drone on for 8 hours a day and then go home and do additional work without pay. We're treating our students like slaves, prisoners even. You have to be in this facility for 8 hours. You get 3 or 4 minutes to get from one classroom to the other, which is timed arbitrarily. What if you're over on this end of the high school and you need to go to this one? You have to sprint. You have to sprint just to make it on time. What if your teacher keeps you over? Well, now you're late to this class and you're being attacked and punished for it. No, we need intelligence. We need 30 minutes of curriculum, 10, 15 minutes of student-teacher interaction or rest, and 0 homework. The only thing you should be doing at home is studying for a final or a test. That's about it. And even the Finnish schools don't actually have tests that determine whether or not you pass. It's more of a guide of how much you've learned. That's how our education should be structured. Not to disagree with saying it needs to be held to a higher standard. I'm just saying I agree with that, so I want to talk about what that education might actually look like.
Well, the education system is being milked for profit by very many mechanisms. The student loans, which we started this conversation with, are one mechanism. It used to be very generous. When I took student loans, and people my age, we all think children are complaining about student loans. That's insane. Best loan I ever had. That all changed in what year? 96?
94, 96.
94, 96. Bill Clinton signed a law making student loans non-dischargeable, and that's gone downhill ever since. The profits have gone through the roof. And in the K through 12 system, we're seeing for-profit schools enter. And the GI Bill is paying for a lot of students to go to for-profit institutions. No government money should ever go to any for-profit school. If you can't find schools that will teach and have the teaching as the objective rather than the profit, we got to start over. The privatization scheme is not just education. It feeds right into the private prison system, whose objective is recidivism. If you get out for a while, they want you to come back because they get $100 a night for you staying in their hotel. And they certainly aren't spending anything like that. They have contracts that the government is required to provide them a certain number of prisoners, irregardless of whether there's any crime. These are abominations in a democracy.
All right, so next question, I want to move into tax reform. All right, so next thing I want to move into is tax reform. So the newest goal of the Republican-led House and Senate is tax reform, lowering taxes for the middle class, even though now they have admitted that taxes may go up for some people, and a tax break for the upper class as well, even though they deny that. So starting with you, Tom, what are your thoughts about this current tax reform bill? And if you were elected to Congress, what would you work for in terms of taxes?
Well, I think the tax reform bill is a good template, but you just have to reverse the sign of every number in it. So instead of reducing tax rates, let's increase them by the same amount. Let's create a surplus, and then we can not cut Medicare and Medicaid, and we can reinstitute all those things like protection of the environment that our regulatory agencies, through the cabinet officials appointed by Trump and approved by a compliant Senate, have destroyed. Regulations and laws, neither of those are intrinsically bad. In the Republican lexicon, laws are to be obeyed and regulations are bad. But in reality, both laws and regulations originate from our Congress. And if people in our Congress don't appreciate the possibility of laws being bad, that would explain a lot. A lot of congressmen think that once they vote on it, it becomes moral and proper. That's simply not true, and we see so many egregious examples of that right now. No, you do nothing that's in the current tax bill. It is a template for destruction, and you throw it out, and you make sure that anything you do is not in that bill.
So while we wait for Sen to get back real fast, a follow-up on that. Telling people that you're going to raise their taxes can be problematic. So how do you run a campaign on the idea that taxes might be raised for some, and how do you tell them how that would benefit them, even though they will be paying more per month?
Well, first, pause for implementing microphone on. Yes, to respond to the question. I have not met, I don't know hardly a single person whose taxes would be raised under any plan that I would propose. Right now, as of 6 years ago, the rich people stopped asking for a flat tax because they're now paying significantly lower percentage of their income than their secretaries, their skilled labor, their unskilled labor, their lawnmower. All those people are paying more percentage of their income than the rich people in this country under the present rifled with loopholes tax system allows. They work the tax system. They pay their lawyers to offer the bills which are passed at the behest of their lobbyists. They're paying minuscule tax rates, and they find that a burden. A tax system should be progressive, because if you have $1,000, it's a lot harder to make the next 1,000 than if you have $1 million making the next million. That's why taxes should be progressive. Those people making good money should be feeding back into the system to ensure the opportunity of success for the people who come after them, the next generation, not just their children, because their children may not be the ones who can bring us cures for cancer or other things much needed that will keep this country competitive and keep the whole world in better health and better lifestyle. The rich people are not the most productive. They are simply the richest. Dwight D. Eisenhower understood this perfectly well. But at the time that he was president, the maximum tax rate was either 89 or 90%, I believe. And Eisenhower's explanation for this was that when people who are making a lot of money pay these taxes, it's easier for them to create a new job, because it reduces their income by only a tiny fraction of the salary of that new employee. So if they can make a profit from that new employee, great. They hire more people. To decrease their taxes gives them no incentive to do any public good, like donating to museums or hiring people to create new products and services. It's not the rich people who have driven the revolution in technology. It's the poor people who eventually start working for the rich people as they become moderately rich. That's where the progress in this country comes from. Now, all of the people in both parties all the time say that small businesses are the drivers of the economy. That happens to be true. The statistics bear that out. But the laws that are passed on behalf of these small businesses curiously, dramatically improve the lot of the big corporations at the expense of the small businesses that they purport to favor. Because in reality, large corporations are seeking a monopoly position. We recognized back in the 30s that you had to break up monopoly positions. If capitalism is to succeed, it will succeed as a stable system only by competition between corporations on equal footing. And that is not what the corporations are lobbying Congress to produce. And as they lobby Congress successfully, it actually destroys the corporations that we need to be competitive in the world, because it hollows them out. They find their corporate lawyers, their lobbyists, to be the biggest profit center. And they forget the scientists and the engineers and the technicians and all those attributes of a corporate that are the real assets of a corporation, that are necessary for it to succeed in competition worldwide. So our corporations, by virtue of their very successful lobbying, are in the worst position in our present century, in the last century, in terms of competitiveness with the countries that we need to compete with. And it profits the world when we are competitive, and ourselves.
All right, so Sam, let me bring you into this conversation. So we're discussing the current tax reform bill that is being discussed in both the House and the Senate. So give us your thoughts on that current bill, and then what you would like to see included in a tax reform bill.
So tax reform, as the question is and how it stands, obviously the one that's proposed right now is only benefiting the wealthiest members of society. There's no questions or misunderstanding that whatsoever. But I think one of the earlier questions, or maybe a question that ties into it, is what can we do for tax reform, and would any of those policies that we talked about earlier somehow raise taxes? So without going on the diatribe of MMT, I will say this. No amount of number crunching that I have done, that I have seen, that I have read, researched, or looked into could provide anything other than a massive tax windfall for the middle class. If we expanded the 15th percentile tax rate to all incomes 100,000 and below, every single one of those people would have far more check at the end of the month than month. And that's the bottom line. You go 15% and then you go 28.1%. Like that's the next tax bracket. 15%, 28.1. If it's 15% across the board until you hit that, arbitrary cutoff for what we define as middle class income, so that whether you're in New York City or rural Ohio, your money goes the same distance for being able to pay for things, right? That gives a massive, massive tax windfall to the middle class, which allows them to spend, which allows corporations to make money, which is where the largest amount of tax income is supposed to come from. Unfortunately, that's not how it works either. The vast majority of taxes is income tax in this country. It used to be flipped. It used to be the vast majority of taxes was from corporations. So what we need to do is eliminate the loopholes, and we certainly need to end the corporate subsidies to the tune of $1.5 trillion. Right now, the country wastes $3 trillion annually, or loses out on it, depending on how you look at it. We're losing out on $67 billion annually by not taxing religious entities. We're losing out on $500 billion approximately for tax fraud and $500 billion for not taxing financial transactions. But those are kind of okay. So people aren't paying their taxes, so we should probably make it easier for them to pay it. And then whatever the hell a financial transaction tax is and what that looks like, I don't know what that is, but we're missing out on it. So, let's add that to the thing. Just doing those two things, we get $1 trillion more. Our deficit right now is less than $1 trillion. Boom, automatic surplus. Get rid of the subsidies, boom, automatic surplus. If we legalize marijuana, hemp, and so recreational, medicinal, and industrial use marijuana, we get at a minimum $1.5 trillion in tax revenue that we don't have access to right now. So simply by, I don't know, it's kind of hard to discuss facts and numbers in a sort of arbitrary way. If we did what we were supposed to do as a country, we would have a net surplus of anywhere between $7 to $11 trillion a year, period. End of story. There is no arguing these numbers. It's just, the fact that it doesn't happen tells you that the people in power don't want it to happen. And any argument against that, we could be a profitable country and still have a free market society, is, it just doesn't exist. First of all, when I talk about the subsidies, look at the line items anywhere in the federal budget. Where is the corporate subsidies in the federal budget? It's not there. It doesn't exist. It comes from literally nowhere. That's why the fiat currency system, this argument about MMT, exists, because the government spends money into existence. It writes it in the legislation into existence. That's why to say we can't afford universal healthcare education is stupid, because we can afford an $80 billion increase to the defense budget, but we can't afford a $20 million increase to, say, I don't know, NASA or education or healthcare. It's just, there is no justification. There's no moral argument. There's no mathematical argument. There's no economic argument. There is only the facts. There is only truth. That the reason why we have deficits and the reason why we don't have these things is because the people in power wish it to be so. And nothing else can be said about it.
Well, the corporations are what drive the people in power. I think you mentioned the defense budget. They passed $70 billion, as I understand it, more than what the military asked for. And I'm sure the military was not being chintzy with itself. They were asking for everything they could think of. I suspect, and perhaps you know, Sam, that $70 billion was largely for unwanted weapon systems that corporations, military producers asked congressmen to support. So we give an extra $70 billion to a department which doesn't even want that money for F-35 fighter jets that they don't actually want, for additional ships for the Navy that they will not have enough men in the Navy to man, and we support for-profit military contractors in war zones. And one of my fundamental platform issues is to ban military contractors in war zones. So take a moment with that. My friend Seth Alexander was in the military, injured in Iraq. He would be standing on a guard tower at the corner of the green zone in Iraq. And down below him, protected by the wall, is a contractor, I've forgotten, KBR perhaps, making $250,000 a year for his expertise in helicopter repair. Now, Seth is up on the guard tower making $25,000 a year. He was trained to repair that same helicopter. But our government, at the behest of corporations, is preferring to pay somebody 10 times as much. And we have military contractors. The Marine MPs are military contractors. The cooks, the people building the shower stalls, they're all military contractors. It would be much more efficient to get rid of them all and to pay our soldiers twice as much so their wives back home would not be on food stamps. The objection that I hear most cogently is, well, we won't be able to fight with an all-volunteer army if we got rid of the military contractors because they do so many of the jobs. Well, if you paid soldiers a living wage, you would not have a recruitment problem. And if you can't recruit your own citizens to fight a war in their own defense, it's just possible that that war is not being fought in their own defense. The other aspect, there are several aspects of this issue, is that the military contractors are not subject to military code in general, nor under the command of military officers. Their basic loyalty is to the profits of their corporation. And those profits would end if we won a war. So we have not won a war in a very long time. And the prospects of ever winning a war again are near zero, unless it becomes an actual attack, an actual threat on the homeland. And then we would change the rules and we would win the war. But no one is threatening our homeland. And we are creating the terrorists through the wanton acts of lawless contractors, because they are actually 007s under no legal constraints. But they're not 007s directed to a specific mission of national value. They're 007s who can drive along and kill civilians and create a whole family who does not like, who justifiably hates America, and who will send terrorists to fight against us. So this has to end. We would save money, but much more importantly, we would save lives, and we would be a moral presence again in the world that we have lost in the last 50 years. I've talked to a number of veterans. Almost universally, they liked the idea. Once I'd say, yes, we double the wages because we don't have to pay those ridiculous contractor salaries anymore. I know you're a veteran, Sam. How does that strike you?
Well, I mean, that's where I was going. I was going to say, I mean, you bring up the military-industrial complex and the contractors overseas, and you're right. That is one of our biggest wastes. And what I've never understood is why we have civilians doing military positions in the first place. I get that some facets of the base could be manned by citizenry, such as like all of the support facilities, like the food courts and the shopping areas and all that. But like the hospitals, we could have military doctors, but I could understand bringing in civilian doctors there and hiring GS employees to man the pharmacies and whatnot. But we have military people to do all those things as well. Same thing with gate security, same thing with construction, same thing with administration and all this. We have people in the military to do all these things. If we have a shortage, then we need to increase our numbers. If we have too many, then we need to decrease our numbers. But the management should stay within the military. Now, even if we are going to hire civilians to do those jobs, why are we paying contractors 2, 3, 4 times as much as we would pay a regular enlisted person or even a civilian under a GS pay scale? It's ludicrous what these people are making in 6 months in these war zones where they're not necessarily even at risk. Like a lot of the times they're in Qatar, which is one of the wealthiest, or Al Udeid, or no, I think it is Qatar. I think it is Qatar, where they are, it's the wealthiest city or state or whatever in the world per capita. And they're getting paid 6 figures to just even fly over. It's ridiculous. So a lot of the fraud and the waste is absolutely due to the military industrial complex and these contractors that are getting paid just stupid sums of money to do the same job that I could do and went through the training to do. And you're right, it would save taxpayer dollars, or at the very least, that money could be put towards improving training, supplies, rebuilding structures and facilities. It could be any number of things. At least 20%, some as low as 20%, as high as 33% of the defense budget is just that overhead fluff. Could you imagine what $100 to $200 billion could do for our military if it was actually invested into our gear, into our defenses, into our facilities and our structures? $200 billion is more than what we pay our enlisted members in their benefits and salary. We could double our numbers with $200 billion. You know what I'm saying? It's just, no matter how you slice it, if we're going to have that large of a defense budget, we should be investing in our military, not in corporations.
I'm glad you have all those numbers. I'm going to have to get them from you because I have had some trouble tracking them down. Appreciate that, Sam.
All right, so in these last 3 minutes that we have, I want to wrap up with one, I guess, easier question to answer that's not these complicated topics that we've been discussing. So I guess my last question to wrap up, so say we are a year from now, day after Election Day, and you are both congressmen-elect. What is the first bill that you would either sponsor or co-sponsor with another member? What is the first bill that you would want to put up for a vote in the United States House of Representatives?
Well, I'll take a shot at that. My first bill would be H.R. 676, H.R. 608, and H.R. 3671. We can do that the first day. The last one is Off Fossil Fuels by 2035 by Tulsi Gabbard. I would amend that to include a vigorous $100 per ton carbon tax, to use free market mechanisms to drive the dirtiest fuels off the market first. H.R. 608 is to ban the sale of weapons to terrorists. It only has 6 Democratic co-sponsors. It has 8 Republican co-sponsors, amazingly, and my opponent, Ted Yahoo, is one of those. I give him plaudits for that. I would amend that to ban military contractors from war zones. The last one, if I can make it there, is H.R. 676, which is single-payer health care. That'd be a good day.
I would probably be right along with you with signing up for, co-sponsoring, voting for, in favor of all those bills as well. But there would be one more bill that I would propose, and it's one that I've been working on for my campaign, which is a school-to-work pipeline, which is, we have an education system that is already broken, and I've discussed that. But the reason why it's broken is because these students are going to school, going to vocation schools, and they aren't able to get jobs with their degrees and with their skills. Now, on the university side of things, that makes sense. There's an oversaturation of 4-year degrees. And on the vocation school, it doesn't make sense because there is a surplus. There's a demand for skilled labor, but it might not necessarily be in cosmetology or whatnot. So what I would propose is that industry and the state, as in the government, helps coordinate with the schools in pushing certain curriculums and needs, and that if you participate in those programs or those degrees, the state will guarantee you a job, and will even cover your moving expenses within the 6 months of graduation. And even if it isn't one of those guaranteed slots, that the state will work in partnership and in coordination with businesses either in your area or offer like a 10%, 50% moving expense to get a job utilizing your degree or your earned skill from that vocational school. The issue is not necessarily that our secondary schools are problematic, it's that they do not prepare our students or our young people for a future, nor does it leave them debt-free afterwards, and both have to be addressed. So in addition to everything that Tom just said, I would propose the school-to-work pipeline and make sure that our next generation actually has a chance to enter the workforce.
Alrighty, so I think that's a perfect way to end it. I want to thank both Tom and Sam for allowing me to moderate their discussion. Just to reiterate once again, Tom Wells is a candidate for the Democratic nomination in the 3rd Congressional District here in Florida, which encompasses the Gainesville, Florida area, as well as to the north, west, and east. And Sam Ronan is a candidate for the Democratic nomination in the 1st Congressional District of Ohio. Feel free to look them both up online, and if there's anything they each want to add real fast at the end, I would invite them to do that.
Well, my campaign can be found on Facebook at Tom Wells for Congress and on the web at tomwellsforcongress.com. And I very much appreciate people looking at those. If you like it, join me in calling people, talking to people, and getting the word out. Thank you so much.
And I'll just leave it with this. Obviously, my website's runninforcongress.com. All of my social media has my name in it, so just look for it. But one of the things I wanted to hit on again is this Our Voice initiative canvassing tool. It's something that'll revolutionize everybody's campaign, everybody's activism. It allows you to go door to door and ask people what they care about, and you being able to put that into the palm of your hand and storing it for the entire country, anybody who uses this to see. And then I would also recommend going to the candidate directory so that if you're well known or not, somebody can go to that directory and find you, support you, elevate you, and share your voice with the rest of your community. And finally, there's going to be a candidate sort of Twitter party, hashtag party, Progressive Slate 2018 this Friday. What we want to do is create candidate cards. You put your picture on there. We encourage the candidates write, I endorse, the candidate themselves, and then a few lines on what they stand for, what they're fighting for. So anybody who supports you can share this card and show, I endorse this person, I support this person, and we can make our campaigns not only synced and unified, but also grow in exposure and organic growth. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you to both of the candidates. Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to end it. Have a great night, everybody.